The second step buckled his knees. The pressure doubled as if the staircase had found a rhythm and decided to match it to his pulse. A ring started in his ears like a pot lid struck in a kitchen far away. He let it pass through him. Breath in until it brushed the ember in his center. Breath out until the tightness softened by a hair. His vision steadied. The stone underfoot was cold and faintly slick, as if fog had condensed and refused to leave. He did not look back. Looking back would give the crowd a face, and faces would pull at him. He let the noise smear into a single low roar, the sea beyond the wall. The sparrow's claws shifted on his shoulder, a light weight against the heavy sky. A third step. The weight crawled under his ribs and set its hands there, an unkind grip that tried to squeeze the air out like water from cloth. Panic flickered at the edges of his attention, quick and bright. He saw himself misstep. He saw himself drop to a knee. He saw the elders turn away. He saw Zhaoran's mouth shape something that would live in the dormitories for months. He let each image come, feel its heat, and pass like wind through open shutters. He lifted his foot again. By the fifth step his legs trembled. The space between breaths became the only place he could live. He found a cadence and polished it smooth. Draw air slowly, chi riding it like a leaf on a quiet stream. Let it rest a heartbeat in the dantian where the ember glowed. Send it outward into the thighs, the calves, the small muscles around the ankles that keep a body from swaying. Release without force. Accept what returned. The pressure pushed. He softened and shaped it. The seventh step met him like a closed fist. He recognized what it was. The step of breath. A threshold named on an old scroll in a quiet room. He smiled without moving his mouth. Of course it would come early. He had always been a creature of stubborn lungs and patient beats. He let the staircase test him where he was most honest. The sparrow shifted again, then went very still. He stood on the seventh step until sweat found his eyebrows and drip by drip left him. His shoulders tried to creep toward his ears and he told them to settle. He counted breaths, then let counting fall away into listening. The pressure did not lessen, but it stopped feeling like a hand. It became weather. He had stood in weather before. He lifted his foot and placed it on the eighth step. Voices reached him more clearly now. The crowd thought itself quiet and was not. Some murmured wagers, old silver sneaking from palm to palm. Some of the outer disciples breathed for him in sloppy sympathy, their chests rising when his did. A steward near the base cleared his throat, the sound too sharp, a lid to cover pity. Above, on the raised platforms, the elders watched with the stiffness of carved guardians. Only Elder Shen's head tilted a fraction, not in concern, but as if thinking with a new bone. By the 10th step the weight had found his back and pressed between his shoulder blades like a burden he had carried too long. The memory it woke did not belong to the steps. It belonged to the path that had brought him here. Buckets upstairs. Wood across yards. The endless rise of a mountain that never seemed to change while he changed under it into something leaner and quieter. He let the memory stand beside him. It had its own breath. He would not tell it to leave. He would not invite it to speak. 11. 12. The space between footfalls stretched until each placement was its own small ceremony. The second threshold slid over him without announcement. It tasted of hot iron and a mirror that makes a man a shade taller and a fraction more glorious than he is. Pride is a kind companion until it decides to steer. He felt it offer him a picture of himself, a clean figure on a high step, the sect below watching with awe. He saw that picture and set it down like a cup he could not afford to spill. The staircase did not reward the image. It rewarded the step. He climbed. By the 15th the world narrowed to stone and pulse and a small bird's weight. The sparrow's chest brushed his cheek as it balanced, light touches to remind him that not all things pressed down. Its eye caught his, black and exact. A whisper that had visited him in dreams came without sound. Accept. Do not drink all the river. Take what you need to cross. He took one more breath and rose to the 16th step. A hiss moved through the crowd, the sound some make when a knife first touches fruit. It carried both surprise and the appetite for more. Liang kept his head level. His clothes clung to him, heavy with sweat. His hair had plastered itself to his neck. The stone felt warmer, whether from the morning sun now lifting or his own heat he could not say. 17 to 20 came like a rope with knots at intervals. He used them. On 21 the staircase changed the game. A thin pain laced his left arm from wrist to shoulder as if a memory of an old strike had been stored there and now replayed itself sharper. He recognized the third threshold when it unfurled. The step of pain. Imagined wounds, growing teeth that feel too real to ignore. He rotated the arm slowly, found the smallest circles that did not feed the ache, and moved within them. The pain did not leave. It agreed to travel rather than camp. By the 24th step it had moved to his ribs, a familiar scream from nights after drills when the cot felt like a punishment. He smiled to himself again and the smile steadied him. Pain wanted him to be a child bargaining with a fever. He did not bargain. He kept climbing. On the 27th step the pain left him all at once and something colder arrived. It was a thought dressed as a certainty, the kind that likes to take the tongue by the root. You cannot do this. The elders sent you to fail. The sect loves a spectacle and you are the piece of fruit on the plate. He recognized the voice. He had worn it before in smaller trials. He let it speak exactly once in his head, thanked it for its caution, and set it behind him the way a worker sets an empty basket down and keeps walking toward the next load. He placed his foot on the 30th step. The crowd could count. A low wave rolled outward. On a balcony above, someone exhaled a laugh that did not quite become unkindness. Elder Yun's fingers tapped the arm of his seat in an even rhythm, a drum for himself alone. Elder Sui's smile held. Elder Jian looked like a boulder thinking about weather. Shen rested his chin on his knuckles as if listening for a distant instrument. The mist began to thicken. It did not blur the steps. It blurred the line where his body ended and the world began, a soft theft of edges. He tightened the stitch of his attention and put it through his breath. The sparrow's claws adjusted their grip on his robe. Its head turned toward the mist and tilted once. The pressure shifted. His stomach tightened before his mind understood why. Figures moved at the edge of sight, not the shapes of elders or disciples, but other familiar weights. A boy with a smirk built like a knife. A face with an old scar turned the wrong way. Shadows that borrowed the mass and motion of those he had fought in courtyards and on walls. The fourth threshold climbed to meet him. The step of rivals. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their bodies made arguments he remembered too well. Zhao lunged in that first sharp way of his that always came half a beat earlier than sense. Ren Yao's eyes flared with that hard light that made the air wary. Others he did not name wore the stances of contempt and disappointment in the way a person wears an old coat. The staircase asked him whether he wished to fight ghosts to prove he could. He stood until the first of them reached him, and then he bowed. The movement was small and precise, a recognition without submission. He stepped to the side and put his foot on the next stone. The rival's strike passed through space where he had been as if through curtain. He did not look back to see if the figure turned. He knew some shadows insist on being chased. He did not chase them. He climbed. By 36 his breath had shortened again. The rivals thinned and then were gone, not defeated but uninvited. The pressure found new tools. A memory of Lin's laugh on a morning before the breach arrived so clean that for a moment Liang thought he heard the sound ahead of him on the steps. It caught at him. The air tasted like old smoke. He had to make a choice that had no good flavor. Let the memory drag behind him like a sack, or set it beside him like a lamp. He chose the lamp. He said the name once in his chest and kept moving. When he reached the 40th step, the weight became a sentence. It did not press. It declared. It spoke in the grammar of absolutes. You will always be the one who carries buckets. You will always be the one who cleans courtyards for those born to shine. Even if you climb, they will call it luck or pity or a trick. This was not pride or pain. It was the step of name coming early to taste him. He felt it try to take the word Liang and stretch it thin until it snapped. He answered by breathing his name to himself the way a person breathes in cold weather to prove to their body that the world can enter and leave without stealing everything. He let Liang be a sound without an argument attached. The staircase pushed again. He pushed only enough to avoid falling backward. Then he rose to the 41st. Somewhere below a voice shouted his name without ceremony. It carried exhaustion and hope and a dare. He did not let it register as which friend it was. He took the sugar of it and put it under his tongue for later. At 43 the sparrow lifted from his shoulder, hovered, and settled now on the rail to his right. The mist left a sheen on its feathers that looked like oil on water. It stared not at him, but at the step above the one he stood upon. He followed its gaze and saw nothing except stone and light. A trick then, not from the steps but from the world itself. Not every sign is for you. He laughed once, a small breath that could be mistaken for a cough, and climbed. By 45 his legs had to relearn how to stand. The muscles in his hips made new demands. He gave them what he could. The stone had warmed under his feet. Either the day had turned or he had. The elders remained still. Ren Yao had come to the railing at some point. He watched with a quiet that did not read as generosity. Zhao Ren stood in a knot of inners wearing his bandage like a badge. His eyes were hungry. If this story has you listening this far, subscribe to Azure Inkblade so the next chapter finds you instead of getting buried. It helps us keep making more of these every week. Now, back to the chapter. Whether for triumph or for the collapse that would give him back the order of things Liang could not tell. It did not matter. At 47 the fifth threshold tested the seam he had thought strongest. A figure appeared 2 steps above, curled on the stone, half present half faded. A boy whose face he did not know and knew. In the way that certain strangers pull at a person. The staircase let the weight fold into a cry. Help me. The step of mercy had a voice that was too easy to obey. He could step past. He could lift. He could risk both their falls. The rules had not changed. Choose and the other choices die. He knelt without moving his feet, put his palm against the stone, and breathed for 2. The weight tried to make that impossible. He let it be difficult and did it anyway. The figure on the stone breathed once in time with him and then dissolved into mist, not gone but at peace with going. He rose carefully. His thighs shook. The sparrow made a tiny sound like a seed hitting a plate. He put his foot on the next step. 50 arrived with no ceremony and all the relief in the world. A sound went through the crowd that was not entirely human. It was the sound of people realizing the measure they had made in their heads had to change. Elder Sui shifted for the first time. He did it in the way men do who have learned to hide tails, but the shift happened. Elder Jian's jaw moved, the faintest sign of approval a stone can give. Elder Yun's mouth made a thin line, then relaxed. Shen closed his eyes and opened them again like a man who has decided to stay awake longer than he promised himself. The 51st step wrapped him in a cold so true it froze his thoughts before they formed. He felt very small in a very old place. The air went thin in a way that had nothing to do with lungs. He understood it without words. The step of witness. Eyes he could not see opened. Not the elders. Not the disciples. Something else. His skin knew it. The hair on his arms rose though there was no breeze. The sparrow scraped its beak once on the rail and went still as a carved thing. He stood and let himself be looked at. His mind tried to fill the silence with explanations, the way a novice fills a shrine with smoke and chatter. He let the urge pass. He allowed the gaze to map him. He did not try to present a version better than the one the steps already had under its hand. He felt again the desire to tell a story about why he had climbed and who he was climbing for. He let the story stand behind him like a line of tools and kept his hands empty. The pressure did not ease. It changed flavor. It asked a last, simple thing. Will you move again, knowing that some see and none may help? He wanted to. He feared to. He moved. 52. 53. He no longer knew if the mist had thickened or if his eyes had grown soft. The lines on the steps swam and then gathered sharply when his foot approached, as if the staircase wanted to be sure it understood where he planned to land. The world below had become a shape more than a place. A band of color and movement and sound. Within it, here and there, lights. Each a person holding breath or holding back words. He thanked them without telling them he had. At 55 a thought came that did not feel like his. You could stop here and no one would fault you. He examined it. It had a polite voice and carried a handkerchief for sweat. It was not unkind. It was also a thief. He set it gently aside and climbed. His legs sent messages up the long wire of his spine that sounded like curses sent to an indifferent god. He let them send and did not argue. He had enough to do. On 58 a figure stepped into his path again, then 2 more, then 10. The rivals had decided to return dressed as spectators this time. Their eyes stared past him toward the top of the steps as if the climb were theirs and he had interrupted it. He moved through them like a man through tall grass. He did not break stride. The crowd below could not see the ghosts. They only saw a boy climbing through a patch of nothing and smiled for reasons they did not have to agree upon. 60 waited. He knew it would. The air above it shimmered the way heat does over a road in summer. He reached it and the staircase pressed with a seriousness that felt like an old teacher correcting a young mistake. His spine tried to bow. He straightened it slowly. His lungs demanded a debt he could not pay in one installment. He paid what he could. Someone below began to clap once and stopped, understanding that the sound would break rather than build. A mutter went through the inner disciples that sounded like curiosity hiding behind contempt. Renyao had not moved from his rail. His eyes had gone strange, the way a man's eyes go when his own path has turned and no one else can see that the ground ahead will not hold him. Zhao Ren's glare had softened into a thing like interest. He hated it. He could not help it. The steps make witnesses of everyone. 61 held, then gave. 62 asked for a truth he did not know how to give. He found a small one and offered it. I want to live. The staircase took it. 63 wanted another. I am afraid of being made into a sign for others and thrown away when they no longer need the sign. The staircase took that too. The weight shifted. He realized he had reached the step of name in earnest now. Not the early taste. The real taking. It tried to strip him of every title, every insult, every hope he had borrowed to keep walking. He let it lift those away and found beneath them the simple fact of a boy who had learned to endure because to stop was to be trampled. He offered that plainness. The steps respected plainness. He climbed. By 65 the world had reduced to the square of stone in front of him and the pulse inside his hands. The sparrow made a sound that could have been approval or simply a reminder that it still existed. He did not ask it to tell him which. 66 arrived with a surge from the crowd so soft it sounded like a sigh 1,000 people might make after holding air too long. A ripple touched the elders at last. Elder Sui's smile had cooled. His fingers no longer rested easy. Yun's eyes had narrowed not in malice now, but in assessment, a craftsman watching a tool behave beyond its grade. Jian allowed the corner of his mouth to think about turning up and then did nothing more. Shen's hands had folded as if in prayer, but his face did not look like a man asking favors. It looked like a man saying thank you for work honestly done. The weight did not relent. It had no reason to. The steps were not kind. They were honest. Their honesty had an edge that would cut without apology. Liang kept giving inches of himself to buy inches of stone. He did not try to buy more than he had. On 68 the mist changed again and the staircase exposed him to a sky without color. He could see the top now, not in detail, but as a fact that had moved from rumor to geography. It was close enough to poison. He refused the poison. He did not make promises about the last 32. He did not announce to himself a number he would reach. He only lifted his foot and placed it and then did that again. He did it until the number 70 lived under him and the courtyard rang with something that could not be called applause and could not be called prayer. It was the sound a body makes when it feels proof that something hard might be possible. He let that sound pass through him as he had let the pressure pass. He did not drink it. He did not swat it away. On the 71st step his left knee buckled. The joint had been good to him. He apologized to it silently for the way he had used it, like a tool borrowed from a neighbor without asking. He set his other foot a hair wider. He found a new line of balance. He promised his knee a bowl of something hot later and a long evening without stairs. It did not answer. It did not need to. 72. 73. A thin trembling began in his hands that had nothing to do with fear. He curled his fingers and felt the tremble become work. The sparrow took flight for a breath and settled again. Its weight returned to his shoulder like a gift he had almost learned to refuse and had decided against refusing. He did not know if he could make 75 until he placed his foot on it. He did not know if he could make 76 until he did. He did not know if he could make 77 and then he had. Below, some of the outer disciples wept without knowing why exactly. Their bodies had decided tears were the appropriate answer to stone and breath. Some of the inners had gone quiet, not with respect yet, but with a recalculation that had no words to cover it. Ren Yao's eyes had gone brighter. Whether with anger or with the recognition of a rival the steps would one day make him meet on a different field, Liang could not tell. Zhao Ren looked smaller among his friends. He did not seem to notice. His mouth moved as if he was arguing with his own blood. At 78 the pressure redoubled in a way that felt personal, as if the staircase had finally decided to set down its bowl and use both hands. Liang met it with the only gift he had left that the steps had not asked for yet. He forgave himself for every slow breath, every sloppy form, every doubt he had measured and not quite finished measuring. He let that forgiveness out like air from a bellows and watched the ember in his center lean into it and thicken without flashing. He lifted his foot and placed it on the 79th step. He could hear nothing else now. The world had tucked its chin and waited. The elders were stone against stone. The crowd was a shape asleep. The sparrow was a point of gravity on his shoulder, tiny and absolute. The steps did not care about any of it. They had one question and 100 ways to phrase it. He answered the only way that had ever convinced a mountain. He climbed. 80 met him and for one heartbeat the weight lifted just enough that he felt his own body as if it belonged to him again. Joy tried to rush in and fill him with noise. He thanked it for arriving and asked it to take a smaller chair. The work was not finished. He stood there long enough for those who counted to count and for those who prayed to say amen in their heads. He did not leave his name on the stone. He left his sweat, his breath, and a promise formed without words. He would return to this place in memory when other weights tried to call themselves permanent. He looked up into the mist where the last 20 waited with their quiet faces and lifted his foot.